be a part of the community. But today, our speaker is no other than Jeff Foley. Now, Jeff is the VP of Research at ZeroFox, and he's been in the AppSec or security space for what, 24 years about? Give or take?
Close enough.
And so it's a pleasure to introduce Jeff as the leader for the Amass Project, which is an attack management project that's good for builders, right? Those that are trying to build security into enterprises, and also good for breakers. Those that are trying to basically maybe see how they can expand their footprint on targets when you're doing adversarial exploit testing and things like that. So without further ado, Jeff, pleasure to have you here, and welcome.
Thank you. So I guess
Someone just joined. I think they were muting themselves.
quick question. If I put up the slides, can they still see me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I made this nice little slide just for this chapter. But so yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time being able to come out to this chapter, or actually Atlanta for that matter. So I'm very happy to be here and be able to meet all of you and anyone who's watching this right now. And like Tony said, I'll be talking about the Amass Project, and I'll be getting into what exactly is that in a moment after I've covered some introductory material first. So in addition to just, you probably want to know who is speaking right now, I think it helps a little bit to mention how did I get here, or what's the context to why did we do this? So I told some people earlier, I spent many years supporting cyber warfare research and development. So let's just summarize that as I saw how these operations actually work. I saw what needs to be done to survive in a contested environment on the internet. And then when I popped out and said, okay, now it's time for, let's join the commercial enterprise world in information security, it was a little bit concerning to see some pieces they were missing that were typical or had to be in place for the military, right? So there was quite a delta right there. And as you can see on here, or I have these in the order of the bottom is the first thing I went to, and then, you know, the things at the top are the most recent. So I went to an energy company first. Critical infrastructure, where some of these things were missing that I'm talking about, specifically keeping track of your attack surface and your exposed assets. But to me, I thought, so a pretty important organization in this country that should be keeping track of these things better than it was, right? But maybe it was just them, right? Maybe it was a one-off situation. So I actually took my concern to some other companies that I won't name, that supposedly had mature, well-funded security programs that had, say, over 500 people working, you know, in these security programs. They also had this problem. So trust me when I say this wasn't any one of these organizations at fault necessarily. It was the expectation just wasn't there to make this a priority or to handle this correctly in the commercial infosec space. So when I realized this, the question came up of, well, what are we going to do about this? Or, you know, there must be something we can do to raise awareness around this. And I'll get into that a little bit more when I talk about this project or how, what it is and how we got started with it. But I've taken that to some other organizations, large companies like Citigroup or Citibank. I've taken it now to a product, oriented company or a security firm where they produce this type of capability for customers. Like over 1,000 customers, many that you've probably heard of before, such as, Walmart and Nike and, big companies that have large attack surfaces on the internet. I also teach this topic at Utica University, where, at least as far as we know, we created the first graduate program or graduate course specifically covering this topic of attack surface management. And it's a required part of their graduate program. I'm also vice chairman currently on the OWASP Projects Committee that oversees all projects for OWASP. And overall, as you can probably already tell, I'm just a big advocate for how important being aware of your presence in a contested environment is to your security. And you'll learn even more about that as we move along. If you want to find me on the internet, you can find me at all these places like GitHub and LinkedIn and Twitter and our Discord. So feel free to reach out and contact me in these places. All right. So a quick little piece about, so to some people, you may read this and say, well, of course, right? Maybe this seems like common sense, but you can't make good decisions about your security program and what you're going to do to protect yourself if you haven't even slowed down and said, wait, what does this look like to our opponent, right? It's like any other game, really, right? Where you have to have a feeling of what are they likely to do to us next? And therefore, what are we going to do to try to avoid that from happening? It's a game, right? Or at least you can think of it that way. It's a back and forth of it's planning, being prepared. That's what a lot of this is about, especially if you wish to take your security program to what I would call a proactive or preemptive approach. If you're just going to sit there and put up walls and say, I hope this works, I really hope this works, and then wait for something bad to happen, well, then that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a matter of time until wall doesn't work and someone gets through the wall or over the wall or under the wall or whatever they managed to pull off, right? But if you're paying attention to what's happening, if you're watching what you're doing and you're imagining or predicting what they're likely to do, you can stay ahead of this. It is possible to manage this problem. It doesn't have to be this grim situation that everyone's painting it as where, oh, it's just a matter of time until the bomb drops, right? So, but that requires situational awareness, right? It requires that you are aware of what's happening so you can make better decisions. Moving on. There's another definition, which I also liked too much to not include it, where it says, at the most basic level, situational awareness is about recognizing what is occurring in the environment and the implications of that activity for the present and the future. Okay? Again, preemptive thinking here. This is important. At least I would like to stress this to anyone who is receptive to what I'm saying. Try to get you and your security program to accept this reality that you need to be thinking about not just right now, but what is going to happen next, right? It's a back and forth game, like I said. Any questions about this before I move on? Or these concepts? Because I'm going real quick on this. I could spend more time on this. In my course that I teach, I talk quite a while about the adversarial perspective. So that's another piece of this that's very important is, in order for you to do this, assuming you're in a blue situation, you're in a blue function or you're in a defensive role, you have to spend some amount of time asking the question of what is my opponent doing? Or what are they likely to do? Or what are they seeing right now? What can they see? What can they imagine trying to do to us? And given what we think they know, what are we going to do to make this even harder for them, or to force them into a certain route where we could have better visibility on what they're doing? But you have to stop and think about this. You can't just, like I said, be making the walls thicker and higher and hoping this is going to work out. You have to imagine the other side of the equation. So there's a whole book that's been published on this, thank goodness, because I didn't really want to write it, where she talks extensively about the attacker perspective, or the adversarial perspective, or the adversarial point of view, whatever you want to call this. That's what this is about. And at the end of the day, what it gives you is at least half of the situational awareness. The other half is you need to know what you're doing, right? Not just what they're likely to do, but you have to understand what you're doing. Taking this back a moment, if you're going back to the basics of attack and defense in not just cyberspace, but probably in any situation, the defender has the advantage of they should know everything that they've done. They have complete visibility in theory, right? On everything that I've deployed, everything that I've put out there, everything I've chosen to do. The attacker is at a disadvantage in this regard, right? They have to look at what they can see and hope that's enough. Hope that that's enough to make the right decisions and get in, say, the quietest way possible, or the way that's not going to lead to them being discovered. But they come in blind, right? The blue side should be able to say that we have complete visibility on what's exposed or what is vulnerable potentially to the attack. Unfortunately, this is not what you find, though, when you go out there and work with these companies. This is how this all started, actually, for me, was I was showing them, this is what you look like to the attacker. Now, keep in mind, that isn't necessarily all the whole truth of what's out there, right? It's just what the attacker can see. But the response I got from every one of these companies I worked with, there hasn't been a single one to date that has said to me, we knew all that, you can leave now. Not one. Every single one has said, we only knew about a percentage of what you just showed us. Some of these percentages are very concerning, like 25% was the worst one I think I ever witnessed. It's very common that they say 50%. I get lots of them saying 80%. I don't think I've ever seen better than 90%. They all come back saying we weren't aware of some amount of what you just showed us. And like I said, I'm sure there's more out there. The attackers need to accept that they probably won't find everything. But it's very concerning that the typical situation for a commercial company is that the attacker knows more than the defender does in this situation, because it should be the other way around. So that is the problem that I said, wow, we need to do something about this. That led to what I'm going to show you how to do tonight. Any questions about that?
We get the slides.
I'm happy to give them to anybody. Yeah, so yes. I don't think they've been given out yet, but we'll take care of it. Anything else? All right. So, what is OWASP Amass? It started as not even related to OWASP, actually. It was just a tool that we created, first of all, to help us go to these companies and just quickly perform these discoveries of their attack surface, so we could get this discussion going of, this is what we found. What did you know about here? Where are the gaps, and how can we help you, fill the gaps or harden, the exposed assets, things like that. And that was great. Like I said, until I realized this was a big problem. And then the question came up of, well, what if we encouraged more people to perform these, enumeration / scanning activities of their attack surface. But a lot of times what we got was everyone saying, well, I don't know if we have people working here that know how to do this like you seem to know how to do it. Or if we have the cycles or the resources to build this into our security program. So, maybe they were right. Maybe that was an excuse not to do it. But either way, we weren't willing to just say, oh, right, and then walk away. So what we did was we created this automated tool, or we kept making this automated tool even better and easier to use so that we could just say, well, look, you don't have to know anything about this. Just run it against your organization's namespace on the internet. And it's going to come back and tell you all the things that we are showing you. And by you keeping up with that and making sure that this is what you thought was out there, you'll just be able to have better, at a minimum, better cyber hygiene than you had before. And it started to work. People seemed pretty thankful to have this. They were using it. As Tony said earlier, corporations were using it, but so were red teamers. And overall, I think it was just kind of raising the bar for awareness around exposure on the internet, which is what we called this initially. We called it like public exposure or exposed assets on the internet, because at this time there was no such coined term as attack surface management, which, by the way, for the record, I don't really like that term and I didn't make it. I think I would prefer that this was called attack surface intelligence, because that's really what this is. And if I get a chance to speak with you about how you really implement this within a security program, I think you would see it resembles threat intelligence far more than it does management of something. It's really information that needs to be spread throughout the program in order for all the right people to leverage it and make the right choices based on it. All right, so what this does is it provides in-depth attack surface mapping and asset discovery. Now, another thing that you wouldn't maybe notice yet from what this accomplishes, but I've told people that we're going to do this and we're in the process of doing it with the project right now, is attack surface can mean a lot of things, right? And some people are quick to think that it just means IP addresses or DNS names or servers that are exposed. But I was on a panel a couple of years ago, I think, with some, people that are also known for being very familiar with this, I'll call it problem space. And I kind of said, but I don't think that should be the extent of what people consider attack surface to be. I think it should be any asset you have exposed on the internet that could have an impact on your security posture, period. Like, if it's out there and it could impact security, well, then it should be part of what you consider your attack surface. And so this project is in the process of being broadened to include even more types of assets that can be discovered and considered in all this. I'll show you a little bit about this tonight, but just keep in mind that it's a work in progress. This is a very active project that is, being enhanced every day. Also, this used to be a tool, strictly a tool, like something you would just find on a Kali box or something like that. It will most likely continue to be a tool, but the most powerful, say, instance of this is now a system which has several containers in it. There's some very interesting things that are going on and that require all the collaboration of all these different components to this system. So it's more complicated than it used to be when it was just another, hacker tool on a Linux box. And the point of all this, as I was foot stomping earlier, is situational awareness. It's visibility. It's to understand what an organization looks like on the internet. whether that's your organization or whether it's the one that you're doing security assessments for, or maybe you have other reasons why you would like to know what this organization looks like on the internet. I don't judge or want to know why people use it. Right, so I guess I kind of covered this already, so I'm not going to do this again, but this is a good point though. Keep in mind, everything about this is meant to be automated. So this isn't an interactive tool. It's not meant for, you can use it for investigative purposes, but it's not an investigative tool. You can't really interact with it and like, poke it to go do something, say specific that is manual, right? It's more, you figure it and let it go. And in the future, it's only going to be even more, this will be even more true, given that we're even looking into ways to, we're looking into ways to integrate artificial intelligence into this process, where the process is becoming more dynamic based on what is being discovered in real time. So you could fire this at one organization and what it chooses to do could be very different than when it looks at a different, another organization. It's always been a little bit like that, which I'll get into in a moment. All right, so if you want to find out more about this, or you're just looking to, as Tony pointed out earlier, maybe figure out where you could find ways to help or contribute to this, or become part of, one of our, say, dedicated contributors. What?
Oh, I was gonna throw the word collaborator out there, but contributor.
Yeah. Right. If you want to jump on, I'm very open to allowing anyone to help with this. I just believe in community. I think there's so much that we can do together. I don't like keeping anyone out that wants to be involved. So I've been very, I would just describe it as like patient over the years, working with people to get them where they feel they need to be in order to become independent and contributing to what we're doing. I don't tell people they can't because they don't know enough about what we're doing or anything like that. So if this intrigues you by the time I'm done tonight and you'd like to follow up on how you could help, find us at these various places. I would say the Discord being the best option. And because that's where all the real communication is going on for this project. And yeah, jump in. We'll be happy to accept your help. Any questions about this before I move off of this slide?
Just a quick picture.
All right. Yeah, so again, I guess I got ahead of myself, but this was a rather important event. This is where the debate came up of, well, what should attack surface mean? And Ben or Nahamsek, he threw the question out. To be honest, I don't know what he thought about it. He just wanted to see what we thought about it, as he was the moderator. But it was interesting because Jason Haddix said, well, I don't think we should get this to be too complicated, or it's gonna mean everything and nothing, right? And valid point, kind of. That can happen. He said, let's keep it meaning what people see it as today, focused, and we'll get more out of it that way. And while I appreciated what he said, or I understood what he meant, I just didn't think that was the right way to go with this, because I don't think we want to blind people to the other aspects of their attack surface. And I do think OSINT has so much to offer, open source intelligence, that is, to security programs. So, I just said, with all due respect, I don't agree, right? So we had different perspectives on this. And I went a little further to say, and I believe this so much that I'll say it right here, we're going to change the definition or the mission of the Amass Project to include this larger scope, or broaden the scope of the project. And ever since then, that's exactly what we've been doing. And I'll show you how as we keep moving along. But I'm really thankful actually that Ben threw the question out because he didn't really tell me he was gonna do that because it was kind of an aha moment for the Amass project. So kudos to Nahamsek. Right, so by making this decision to broaden what we accomplish with Amass, it allows us now to collect more intelligence on other types of assets, right? So that's great. But in order to support that, we ended up having to build this data model that shows, well, what are all these assets and how are they related to each other? How does one help you find the other one? It's actually kind of complicated. And by the way, no one's done this before. They've wanted to, there's a couple places where I found out that people had mentioned that they thought this would be a good idea, but no one had actually undertook this before. And certainly not in an open source capacity or project where it would now be open and available to everyone without, say, ties to a product or something like that. So, we said, well, we're going to create this new data model called the open asset model, which I'll show you in a bit. And we decided to build all this on popular open source technology like Postgres, right? So we could have gotten fancy and it crossed our mind to use graph databases and things that perhaps would have been arguably more appropriate to what we were trying to do. But I said, I think we should do this so that anyone will be comfortable using it. At least initially, we can always move the model to different systems in the future. But I think to get it off the ground and to make this as easy as we can for everyone, we'll use things that people are comfortable with. All right. Any questions about that? Because this is definitely a bit of a topic switch or change of focus. All right. And by the way, this is a huge part of what this project is now focused on, is extending this model and adding more collection capabilities to populate the model and things like that. So if you're interested in helping, that's probably part of what you would end up doing, is either helping us teach people about this or document, what we're doing with this, or develop the capabilities to support this. So that's why it's so important. And it's the other reason I see it as important that we go around telling everyone about it is that many people use this and have no idea that under the hood, this is right there happening. And they just use the tool and then ask it to spit out, a list of subdomain names and things like that, not realizing that what's going on is this is being populated on their system. And what gets them that list of names is a query to this database. So I was careful to use the word standard with this initially because I didn't want to scare anybody. But Jason Haddix went ahead last year and told everybody that this was a data standard, and it was like, all right. And everybody seemed to be happy about that. So whatever. So cat's out of the bag. But that is kind of where we're going with it, is like we're trying to make a data standard for how do you represent what you're seeing out there on the internet. That's what this is. At least as it pertains to assets deployed by an organization.
For what body? Still OWASP or another body like ISO or NIST or?
This is all being kept OWASP for now.
Okay.
And we haven't filed for a standard. I mean, it's just being treated like one very quickly.
So is it version controlled itself, the standard? Or like versioned? Assuming it's going to be iterative. 'Cause I know
We
you
haven't
have-
changed it very much yet. So we've tried to not go down that road yet. It's very much in its infancy. And I guess I'm hoping people will cut me some slack for now, but eventually we're definitely gonna have to be more concerned about that to your point, your question. but not I mean, I'm sure it has a version on the repo right now, but it's not tightly coupled to, well, if you're talking about this version of the data standard, what exactly do you find in it? Not find it support for? We'll get there soon enough, but, and probably within the next 12 months. So, right, but we are developing this so that it could become a standard, not just to be used with Amass, but any tool for that matter that wants to export data that's even partially relevant to what we're doing here and say, but we want to share it in the OAM format so that it can be ingested by other things. I mean, that's really the point here, is to make it so everyone can speak freely, I'll call it, about this, or easier, even if what you're doing has nothing to do with the Amass project directly. For instance, it'd be nice if one day Nmap could export to OAM, right? I mean, it's not, we're not there yet, but you know, that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. And since the two have been referred to as brother sister tools and out there, I would like to think that maybe he would work with me on this. But right, and the key thing about this is this data model does not just represent the assets themselves, right? It, maybe even a bigger part of what you're getting when you use this is the relationships between them. So the model has been designed so that it is very much exactly like you see it out there on the net. It's not necessarily laid out in the most convenient way to use the data. It's the way you actually find these things connected to each other on the internet. So it's for realism, I'll call it, not realism. So there is some work sometimes you have to do to develop, for instance, say the right query to go from, I know this, now I want to know all these things. You could find yourself hopping around in the graph quite a bit before you get the answer you're looking for. That's just because that's the way these things are actually laid out on the net. Right, and it has been designed so that we could add a new type to this over a weekend if we wanted to. It's been, we've made, I'll use the word sacrifices in some cases with how this has been implemented so that it's extremely adaptable, so that we could make quick changes to this, so that if someone comes up, well, let's say a new technology is, or a new version of a technology is released that forces us to change the model a little bit. This won't take months to take place, right? It could if we had made the wrong choices, which is why I think it's worth pointing out that we've done this carefully. That doesn't have to happen. So the OAM is the data standard, which you can find at its own repo on GitHub. The asset DB, or the asset database, is the implementation of the OAM that you can go get and use with, I think currently it's SQLite and Postgres, so that one of them, you know, could be convenient for just hacker tools that, you know, you just want to be able to throw this stuff into a file and do what you got to do with it and throw it away. The other one being, no, we want to hold on to this and we want high performance, you know, access to the data. Like I said earlier, we could support this on other databases. Feel free to make that your goal if you want to join the cause. We just don't have the cycles right now. But I could easily see people saying they would love this if only it was available on these other, you know, database systems. We also have some tooling that we've built around this so that it makes it easier to query the asset DB and pull the data that you're looking to get out, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to know how all this is laid out, you know, in the data model. So users have liked that quite a bit. And the way that this works is that it's a graph-like structure, but so far it's been deployed on a relational database. So again, we've made some kind of like sacrifices, but it works pretty good. Performance is quite good. So we're not too worried about it right now. What this looks like is it's extremely simple right now, where keeping it as there's assets and relations. Now this, you might say, wow, there's only two tables. Kind of. There's two tables with a lot of different kinds of indexes. So think of it as two tables where they're chopped up into a lot of pieces based on the types of data that are in the tables. But it's convenient to have them stay within the same table so that these queries don't get too complicated in order to execute. So it's worked out for now. I would say thanks to indexes saving us performance-wise. But it can quickly cause you to have to say SQLite isn't good enough. Postgres is required. Just because as good as SQLite is, it has its limitations. It's not going to handle this, you know, once you get serious about using this. But as you can see from the way this diagram looks, usually I can like point to something here, but for instance, if you have a fully qualified domain name, here you can see it says owasp.org, and you're looking to find out the DNS record for that name and what address it ends up resolving to. The way that would work in here is you'd have the name, you'd find that, and then you could just say, show me all the relations coming from that record. So maybe in some cases it wouldn't just be the A record, but there could be other relations that are associated with the name. But in this case, to keep it simple, there's just one record or relation. It's the A record, which then points to a different asset, which is the IP address that it resolves to. This is the way this tends to work, is what you might think of as one task, right? Like, oh, I'm going to give the name to dig or something like that, and it's just going to give me everything it can find out about it. It's all broken up into these pieces that are based on the different asset types and the different ways that they're connected together. And this is just what we're using right now with the tool that you can go download on the internet. But I'll show you in a moment, there are many different kinds of assets that we already have in the model, and we're beginning to create the collection capabilities for all these different types. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the whole point of this, right, is that all different kinds of products, interfaces, all different things. Be familiar with the OAM and contribute to this visibility on your attack surface, right? Whether that's by bringing more data to the data, your database, or whether it's just giving you different ways to analyze the data, to answer different questions. There's all different ways that people could create new tooling where all it does is query an OAM database and maybe give you results that you weren't able to get through existing tooling or something like that. So we're trying to build it in such a way that it would encourage more community involvement, I guess you could say, or more things that are already out there or could be contributed to plug in to what we're doing here. Because people have raised the question, for instance, of, well, is the point of all this to take everything that has to do with recon and put it under the Amass Project? And I said, no, no, definitely not, because we're already busy. But it would be nice if you're going to create something that's recon or OSINT, to consider being able to export to an OAM database so that your contributions could be brought back to one place, right? Where then you could ask big questions and get more comprehensive or complete answers, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so back to my point about the different kinds of assets. So earlier you saw, we had all this internet infrastructure kind of information, right? Like, the names, the IP addresses, the net blocks, the ASNs and things like that, or autonomous system numbers. But when you start going down the road of Well, now we want to include WHOIS records and TLS certificates. You start finding email addresses, and then you get individuals, and you can start getting phone number, right? And it's like, it quickly starts opening doors to easily finding more information that perhaps wasn't part of the game before. But who here has ever used the harvester? So we got a couple hands that have gone up. So it's a tool that gives you subdomain names and email addresses, right? Now it does that typically by just querying different data sources, and you give it the domain, registered domain name, and it just says, okay, but that's something I can use to query for two different kinds of information, right? And then it tells you what it finds out. But in this case, there's also data that we could be looking at that includes these other asset types, right? And you could either throw it away, like say, well, it's not what we came here looking for, so we're gonna not hold on to it. Or we could say, well, but it could be of interest, so let's hold on to it or keep it in the database. And maybe that could be something that someone wants to query from in their investigation. Because one thing we learned about with this project, because by the way, this has been going on for 6+ years now, I'm kind of losing track. People have used this for all different reasons, all different use cases, things that I never even considered when we created it. And it's created a lot of situations where they've come to us and said, oh, it'd be so great if only, you guys didn't throw away this data, or you didn't assume we wanted it like this. Because we were thinking, say 5 different use cases or whatever, they, decided to add a couple more to the equation. And unfortunately, at that time, I had no choice but to say, I'm sorry, but we don't support that, or it's not practical for us to be able to do that. Well, when we designed this, one thing we kind of promised is we're not going to assume much of anything about how people are using this. We're just going to collect the data and populate the DB, and they can do whatever they want with it. We don't care. We're just going to give them the truth. We're just going to show them everything that we find. Now, we'll of course make some of we'll implement some of these popular use cases with tooling that does the queries, that gets them the data that they're usually asking for. But the data will be there to answer whatever questions you happen to be interested in answering. And actually, I'm very curious to see what people come up with, because I imagine they're going to find things we hadn't even thought about or considered. So that will be fun. And again, I won't judge, right, for why they're doing it or what they plan on using it for. But as you can see here, though, well, personally, some of that actually kind of spooks me a little bit. I mean, you start collecting all this information, and first of all, we got to be careful because some of this could be like PII, and obviously there's things to be considered here regarding privacy, but also, I mean, we're going to find things that people just aren't looking for really that much currently. And I think we're going to end up rocking the boat a little bit. So we'll see how that turns out. Was there a question? There's somebody I thought raised their hand. All right, so I'll move on. But this is pretty interesting. We're always coming up with new ideas for new things that could be new asset types and things like that. We're also sometimes finding new ways that these are connected or associated, which allows for the new types of relationships. Right, this is definitely community driven. So many of these ideas came from people who have been using this and have said, like I said earlier, if only you guys could do this, or if only it could work more like this. So we've tried to listen carefully, consider that people could have different needs and requirements than we do, and we would like to be able to make this their solution still, or make it so this is flexible enough to be used for all the different purposes or use cases. So we listen carefully to our users. I welcome feedback and criticism on how we're doing with this. I have companies that I work with that do beta testing on this, where I ask them to pound this with lots of data, tell me how it's performing, tell me if it's convenient for them to use it the way they need to use it. And some of these companies have thousands of customers that have huge, namespaces and things like that. And what they tell me is this is the hub of all the collection activities that they are performing, for their clients and things like that. So I'd like to think we're taking this in the right direction. It is capable of, monitoring very large organizations or even many organizations. And that's the direction we're going to keep taking this, is that it's going to be something you can use to watch a lot of the internet potentially and leave that data there for you to then come back later and say, I wonder if this is out there. Because one thing to keep in mind is when this was just a tool, you had to run this every time you wanted data. Right? Every time you wanted something to come back, you had to run the enumeration again. You had to do the work again. That's not the case with the way this works. This is becoming like a platform where you only have to run this as often as you want the data to not be stale, or you want to refresh the information, right? The data is going to stay there now, and you can just keep asking questions all day long against it to drive whatever it is you're trying to do. And that's made it much more powerful than it used to be. All right, a little bit about how that works. So we do have this new collection engine, which is completely based around the OAM, right? So what I mean by that is, instead of it being specific like it used to be to, well, we're just trying to go out there and get this one kind of information and then get it to the user in the most convenient form possible and call it a day. All the collection is based on the type of data and completely different pipelines for, so what do we do when we find that kind of data, and where do we go now and try to learn more? And it's all, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Right, so this has been a complete redesign that started around probably October of last year. So yeah, let's take a look at that. So this has always been true though, since the beginning of this project, and it's probably what makes it different than the many other tools that now exist that you could potentially go use to do similar things. Like if you're looking to go get subdomain names, and that's all you want to do, well, there's Subfinder, or there's options out there. You don't have to use this. But a lot of those tools just go, they take your criteria, right, which is usually a registered domain name or something like that. They go query X number of data sources, and they sort and unique and spit it out, right? I mean, like that's what it is. It's a query and print function. This is different, and it always was, and that's why it's in depth. And I would say none of these other tools can really say the same thing, is that every time something's found, it goes back to the beginning of the cycle and starts all over again, where it means it's completely reevaluated. It's not, oh, we queried all the data sources and we printed it out, now we're finished. It's, let's say we query one data source and it gives us X number of results back. All those results go back on the pipeline and are used as, I'll call it like seed data, to keep looking for more things. Every single thing that's found goes back on at the beginning again, until there's just nothing left to do. And it says, we have nothing left to look for, so we're finished. But that process tends to find a lot of additional data, right? Because for instance, let me give you a quick example, or a simple example of how that can work out in your favor. If you, so if you start with a registered domain name and it gives you www dot, that domain name. And now we say, okay, cool, give us IP addresses associated with that. And now we go get the, the IP addresses that resolve from that name. But then we take the IPs and put them back at the beginning of the cycle and say, well, now go do reverse DNS on those. Those could give you very different names to go look at, which could, when resolved in the forward direction, lead you to different networks. If each of these networks are being like swept for reverse DNS, because that's what we do. We don't just do reverse DNS like on that one IP. We say, well, do it for the 250 IPs that are adjacent to the one that we just found. So it's reverse DNS sweeping. That process can keep going for quite a long time, depending on how they've structured their infrastructure. And if you combine it with other things that can generate names, such as brute forcing and, all these different techniques that we use, like I said, this can keep going for a while, and it can really dig up a lot of interesting things that you're not going to find by just querying data sources. Some of it doesn't come from a data source, right? It comes from this investigating the infrastructure itself. So just something to keep in mind, the cyclic discovery process is quite important.
Sorry to interrupt. We realized that we're getting close to time. So I wanted to know where you were and the slides to jump into a demo. Is that possible?
Yeah,
I don't want to cut off this part either.
we definitely will need more time since we're coming later, though, if we're going to cover all this. All right, so I'll move along quickly, but this collection process is event-driven, which perhaps you would imagine already from what I just told you about the cyclic nature, where all these things are create events, or all these discoveries create events, and they're all handled individually, kind of in this engine for collection. All the events have OAM types associated with them so that they're fed through the appropriate pipelines for investigation. I threw this on here just because some people have wondered what the plugins look like now with the new architecture. We were using Lua in the past, which was kind of nice because I thought it made it easier for a lot of people to write their own plugins. The only thing is I found not a lot of people really do write their own plugins. It always ends up just being us anyway. And it does create some issues. You lose some of Go's powerful capabilities when you're trying to do it through Lua. So we just kind of said, you know what, it was a nice thought, but it's not really worth it. So we went back to it's full Golang now. As much as I like Lua, and it was fun to use it. So some people were happy about that. But yeah, we don't even need to talk about this too much, but everything done in this engine is session based, I'll call it. Like you could have 5 of these sessions going at the same time. They could all be for different targets. They could have different configurations. And it allows for a lot of flexibility in how you're using this. And you'd probably appreciate that more when you actually are using this and you start to realize it's nice that you don't have to have like 5 instances of this running at the same time. It also is really great for resource management because it means even though you have many of these tasks running at the same time, the system will never allow you to exceed things like rate limits and such, which could expose your activity and irritate people on the internet. We're starting down the road of providing a web interface for this. Again, people seem very happy about this. Not everyone is as big a fan as the command line as I am. So yeah, so the dashboard, seems to be making people very happy. And it was quite a pleasure using Grafana, and I'm sure we'll just make a lot more dashboards. So, and if you like that, then please contact me because I'll be happy to assign you to one of these, and you can own it and have a big part in what this looks like to to everyone using it. What you're going to see tonight with our demo / your ability to follow along with me on this is the full-blown system is now implemented in Docker Compose. I'm sure it's not gonna be too long before someone says, well, what about Kubernetes? And then we'll have to do that too. But for now, I seem to be getting away with just Docker Compose. Because there are several containers to this system. And more to come, as it says. All right, so I moved it along for it. Okay.
General.
Well, this would be a great time to ask questions if I have been unclear about any of this, or you're wondering, why would you want to use this, or how does this make sense for your org, or something like that. Now we're just gonna dive into, let's see how you can use it.
I guess I was wondering if you foresaw being able to be ingested in a SIM, or it'll kind of stay a standalone dashboard.
All right. Well, there would be the way I would advise that happen is if a SIM wants to bring this in, they should interface with the whole again. Okay, I would never want to impose another dashboard into a SIM or SOC environment.
Yeah.
That's a great way to get people mad. No, they should just create a connector to the OAM, and that's just like that diagram I had with the hub, right? That's exactly what I want to see happen, is them say, oh yeah, we'd love to bring this data or some slice of it into what we're doing, create the appropriate connector.
Yeah, Jeff, I was gonna ask you, is it connectors, or do you envision like API endpoints maybe being created to also query?
Maybe. It's a complicated data model. It could get messy real quick, right? But we are using GraphQL. So it's not impossible, right? Or what you're asking is doable potentially. To be determined, I guess, right? But not out of the question.
Since it's automated, can you schedule it like ahead of time to run the automation, so it would be like kind of generating reports?
Okay, good question, because actually that's something we will be doing, but we haven't done it yet. And it would be part of what I would call like managing this platform, right? So right now, we're just getting it to work, right? And be able to show you the data. Excuse me. And all the, say, scheduling has to be done manually. So like you could set up a cron job currently, kick off this session, right? But of course, people are going to want to be able to go into the web interface and just say, this is the, say, scope of what we want to monitor, and this is the frequency that we'd like the data updated. Please just do it, so they don't have to think about it anymore. And then it would provide continuous monitoring, right? So yes, we want to do that. We're not where we need to be ultimately, but you can work around it at the moment.
You said just recently that you were using GraphQL. You are using GraphQL for part of it?
Right, so the interface between what you might call the client command line tool and the collection engine that I mentioned a little while ago is GraphQL. Currently, that's the only way you can talk to the engine to set up a new session, push over the session configurations, seed the session with known data, and terminate the session. But that's just the initial API that we have in place. Admitting that we knew it would just be enough to get it off the ground for now. Anything else? All right. So do we have anyone here that is planning to follow along with me? Or should I just kind of? Well, if you are, definitely make sure you have either Docker that you're comfortable with in a Linux environment, or Docker desktop on your Windows, Mac environment. I'll say there's a few administrative things that are annoying at the moment if you're on Linux or Windows because of sharing of some of the directories, like where the data is being kept. Whereas for whatever reason on Mac, it doesn't give me this issue. So I've had, it's been a little bit more pleasant to do this on my Mac. You will need to create a directory by cloning that repository. So everything for this on GitHub is under an org called OWASP-Amass, right? And that's where you're going to want to go if you're just curious about this and you want to start poking around at all the things that we're up to. But specifically, it's Amass Docker Compose that I'll be working from tonight. You'll need to create a copy of that. And then I can show you a few things that you would probably want to do to it before you just go ahead and fire this off. All right. So we had a excellent meeting, in-person meeting in Atlanta. We had a little bit of a time constraint that didn't allow for the demonstration to be completed for the Amass talk or OWASP Amass. And we're going to pick that up now. And so I'm going to start it from being in the same state that many of you would be in if you wanted to follow along with me to do this, do the same, say, following with a demonstration, or you could do it similar and target your own organization or maybe just something you're interested in on the internet. The only thing that I have on this machine that you would want to also have, if you want to make sure you're not going to run into any trouble, is I have Git installed. I have these Postgres tools that I think are necessary if you're going to upload the geolocation data files, which I'll do in front of you. But I think in order for that to work, you have to have Postgres administration tools installed on your system. I think that's it. Otherwise, it's just, basic things like Bash, things that you would have on a Linux box.
And Docker. Yeah.
Oh, of course, yes. Last but not least, but I have Docker Desktop on this Mac. If you just have a typical setup of Docker on Linux, you should be pretty good. I mean, it does have to be for Docker Compose, because that's what we're using here in order to orchestrate, setting up several of these containers that will be interacting with each other on a virtual network. All right, so the first step in all this is to go get the repo from GitHub for the Compose project. So it's git clone, and it's, like I said, at GitHub OWASP-Amass, and then it's Amass Docker Compose .git. Bring that down. Personally, I don't really like the big long name staying on my machine, so I'll probably just change this to be called Compose. Just makes things a little easier. All right, so we'll go in there. And if you take a quick look, you'll see there isn't actually a whole lot in here, at least at first glance, because a lot of what we're going to work with is in the config directory here. And if you really want to see how this whole thing is put together, it's in the compose.yaml file. I don't have time, and I don't think you want to take the time to have me show you how this whole thing works under the hood, but we are going to take a look at some of the configuration files just so you can feel comfortable administering this. So the most important file to get the ball rolling in the config directory is assetdb.env. So if I just show you what's in there. There's not actually a whole lot right now. It's the passwords for Postgres and the password that's used for the Amass engine. And it's the name of the Amass database and the name of the user for that database. You don't need to change the name of the DB or the user. If you're going to deploy this somewhere or keep it running for a long time, I would say you definitely should be changing those passwords. You know, we're all from OWASP here. I imagine everyone feels the same way. I'm not going to change it right now because I'm just going to save myself the time. But I don't recommend that you do that if you're actually going to use this. The other thing I would take a moment to mention is if you don't change it right now, there's no management tooling as part of this project currently that makes this easy to do later. So I would say do it now so you don't have to worry about it for hopefully a long time. Otherwise, your only option is to use like Postgres tooling and do it, say, the harder way or the way that Postgres would have you do it. The other thing you're going to want to see is, so in the config file up, you can see where I showed you what's in there up above. There's a file called config.yaml. That's the configuration for Amass, or specifically, it's like for your Amass session that you create. If we look at that, and I'm just going to do it like this. So there's quite a bit in here, and I'm not going to go over every single thing. Some of it, I hope, is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of it is commented out. It's just there so that you realize you can use it. But what's kind of important in here is the line under options called database. Because if you choose to change the password for Amass in the asset or the assetdb.environment file, you have to change it right here as well. So that's what this is. This is the user and the password for that database. So yeah, if you go ahead and change the password, definitely make sure you change it here, or you're going to end up with problems connecting to it, and you're going to be frustrated probably. But that's all you would have to do. That's all you should have to do when you start this up. There's a lot of things in this file, and in the future, I would say I'll be going into how you can tweak everything in here to change the behavior of this collection engine. But it's kind of out of scope for this discussion. All right, so we'll clear that up. So the way that the user has to interface with this system right now is very similar to the way the original Amass tool worked. So we've tried to keep the command line interface as similar as we could. And so that you can just use it the way you're used to using it, and it will kick off the right activities within the compose environment. That said, in the future, we do want to create a web interface where all the tasking around this platform could be managed from the web interface. But that's not the case right now. You still have to do it from the command lines. And it's also what kicks this off initially for this demonstration. So what we're going to do is perform the enumeration against owasp.org, since we shouldn't be able to get in too much trouble for doing that. You shouldn't be able to get in any trouble for doing this against any organization, really, because the techniques by default are passive. It doesn't create disruptive activity for any of these organizations. So as long as far as I know, as long as you're doing this from within the US, there really shouldn't be anything illegal or even it shouldn't even be considered disruptive to any organization that you're targeting. So you can be just curious and use this to better understand what's on the internet if you like. And people use it that way all the time. But if you want to be careful, then I would say make sure you're only doing this with organizations that have said they're comfortable with it. Especially if you're going to show it to people. I mean, that's a different story, right? And that's why I'm being careful here is, not all companies want everything about their attack surface being shared with the public, even though it's certainly available to everyone if they want to find it. But like I said, some people are more comfortable with this than others. So what we'll do is we'll say Docker compose run. Make sure you put in the dash dash rm. It removes the containers when they are finished. Otherwise, you're going to end up with, let's just say, garbage to clean up when this is over, and you don't want to do that. So we're going to run Amass. We're going to perform an enumeration where the domain is owasp.org. Assuming all this is working correctly, when I fire this off, over here, over to the right in Docker desktop, we should pretty much immediately see these containers come to life. So let's see what happens here. Oh, no, they have to get built first. So yeah, I'm glad this happened. So these images are built from the source code on GitHub. And this is good for a couple of reasons. The big one being this is a very active project. We do make changes frequently, and it makes it rather easy to kind of like refresh all these images quickly. All right, we'll show what's going on in here. So as you can see, though, it didn't really take too long to pull those things down, build the images, and begin firing them up. So that's what we're seeing here. And there are dependencies within this compose. So it requires some of these to come up as healthy before other ones will come up next. And so that's why you see this process or sequence that's taking place. There's also, it also won't build any of the images before they're actually used. So right here, I believe what we're seeing is the actual Amass command line tool being built because now it's going to fire off the command that we requested it from the command line initially. Sometimes the current version of this can be a little problematic when it builds. And I've had situations where I've had to just ask it to do it again, and then it works. I think it's just a timeout, and we're gonna make this problem go away pretty soon. So now what you should be able to see is just our simple little progress bar down here where it says 24 out of 117, or now it's 122 events are in the engine for collection. And you'll see it's moving rather quickly. It could find more events that need to be processed before this finishes. Oh, there you go. We're at 137 now. So the percentage of completion is dynamic during the execution, but at some point it kind of stabilizes, and you'll see this moving along, especially towards the end where it has to do some heavier processing, and it tends to just, I'll say, grind through that until completion. But in the beginning, it's definitely a dynamic process that can fluctuate quite a bit. And so one thing we can do while this is taking place, just to kind of give you an idea of what else the system has to offer, is I can bring up Firefox. We're 3000. Now, if you're wondering where I got that from, over here, you can see the Grafana container is running, and it has exposed a port on port 3000. So if I go to Firefox and I say, so just go to localhost at port 3000, it should let us go to the Grafana page. And that worked pretty good. And so what we see here, or at least I hope you can see, is we only have OWASP and then some things that are related to it to choose from here for the namespaces. And it found so far 29 names. Those names have been discovered across, what do we have here? 4 different organizations. Cloudflare, Google, Amazon, and DigitalOcean. Probably not a big surprise to anyone, given that we all know OWASP is cloud-based. You know, that there's no, say, on-prem that I'm aware of for, you know, OWASP, and they're completely hosted, you know, in these other environments. If we want to say, well, really, DigitalOcean, what do they have there? You can click on this slice of the pie here, and it will show you just the hosts that are in DigitalOcean. So that's kind of convenient, right? It allows you to drill down into the assets that have been discovered by the Amass system. But I can click this little thing here, and then it shows them all again. It looks like our I'll move this out of the way for a moment. Our enumeration completed. So one thing I'd like to show you is how you can upload the geolocation data if you go to IP2 location light and get what I believe they refer to as their DB11 files, which I'm guessing here, but I'm pretty sure that just stands for the fact that they have like 11 fields in them or something like that, meaning they're the files that have the most information. If you get that for IPv4 and IPv6, drop them into this same directory that we're working from. There's a script in here, this upload IP2 location data, that will push it all up to the database and allow Grafana to access it. So I'll real quick make that happen. Just a moment. All right, so we should have the files in here now. And since the database is running, we can run this script. And what we should see is, oh, nice. What do we got? That is, oh, hold on a second, I'm sorry. All right, good. Yeah, so maybe this is a great time to tell you what that was and how you could avoid it happening to you. So if you have Postgres running on your machine, like your host, which I do because I do a lot of development, and you run this, it could try to push it to a Postgres server that doesn't have the database installed, basically. You just have to terminate, your local version of Postgres so that the port that's exposed on in the compose right here is reachable by the tools. So that's what that was. It found the wrong server basically and said, I don't know what you're talking about. Once it could reach the correct server, then it says, oh, good. And then it drops the table, creates a new table, copies the data. You should see it copy both files essentially. So there's the one that just finished, and now it's copying the one for the IPv6. When it finishes that, it should build indexes for this and then complete. When this happens, I should be able to refresh the Grafana dashboard here. And now we have geolocation information, which can be kind of handy as well, because I showed you a moment ago how you can drill down using the different orgs that these assets exist within. But what if you just want to say, really, what are they doing here? Or what 3 assets exist in this at this location? You can click this link right here, and it will show you just the ones at that location. Of course, this is very use case specific why you'd want to do this, but occasionally it can be interesting or useful to be able to quickly filter the data like this. If you do that and then say, oh, but I'd like all the data back, like I said earlier, these little things where it shows you all the data should be able to bring it all back. Yeah. So it's like you get your little snapshot of, oh, what's going on over there, and then you can bring all the data back in front of you. But like, for instance, this is kind of interesting. We can say, oh, what do they have going on in New York City? They say, oh, it's just one IP address. And then we say, well, what is it? And they say it's cloud.owasp.org from DigitalOcean. I like this. I sometimes find it useful to know where are these things and which assets are actually located at these various locations. Just like I probably even more often find it useful to know what providers are being utilized or third-party vendors and suppliers are being utilized, because this can start to reveal partners and things like that as well. So at this point, though, we have the data. It's all been enumerated and saved. Now, if we had more data sources available, this number could be even higher. This is what happens, I'll call it right out of the box, right? Where you haven't really configured much of anything. You haven't requested that some of the more advanced data sources be utilized. So you get, I think this is roughly half of the potential assets that are out there for you to find. Because I did this not too long ago with some of these powerful data sources turned on, and I think I received 50 something results. And you'll see it's very similar for any target. If you do this with only open source intelligence, you'll probably get roughly half of what's actually out there, whereas some of these data sources are very good at what they do and can definitely shed additional light on what is out there to be discovered. And in some situations, eventually it just becomes a game of how much are you willing to pay for it, right? And your company can decide what it's worth to them. Right. But the thing that people often want to know, and I think is quite valuable, is, well, this is great. You collected the data. Your company now can say, well, we have visibility on ourselves, or we know what we look like from the outside. I mean, that's what this represents, right?
the takeaway, if you have to take one thing away from everything I'm saying here, is this means you have the attacker's perspective on your organization. At this point, you did it, right? You've got the data in the database. You have the ability to look at yourself the way a adversary would see you and start to make decisions, hopefully to get ahead of these adversaries and counter their opportunities or close those opportunities for these attackers. I mean, that's what, at the end of the day, this is all about. It's about being preemptive. It's about proactive security measures so that you're seeing what they see and you're doing something about it before they do. But how do we start to answer some of the either typical or interesting questions about the data? That's what a lot of people want to know. Because okay, it's great that you've got the desk or the dashboard. You know, it's good for some basic, just taking a look at this and seeing that everything looks pretty normal. But what if you have very specific things that you want to ask, or maybe have another application pull in to drive decision making and things like that? You don't just want, say, an analyst looking at it. This is where I feel like it gets really interesting. So I'll just need a moment to fire some of that up. Let's see here. Actually, that's not what I want. Just give me a second here. All right. So what I've done, what I'm getting ready right now is I have some of these queries on the database pre-built or ready to show you right now. And they're based off of the OAM data model that was discussed earlier or on site in Atlanta. Now, I've got a preferred tool here that we can use. Let's see here. Just need to make sure that connecting it to the right database. Don't think that's what I'm looking for. Like I said, part of this is I've got too many things I'm always working on. And all right. So if you decide to use this tool, which I find very useful, Table Plus, it's called, it's just so that you can easily connect to a SQL database and start sending queries to it. I don't know for sure if I can increase the font size of this. Let me see if it will let me. Yeah, I have it. So perhaps you'll have to work hard to see some of the things here. I'll see if it will let me when I go to create the SQL, but just real quick on the left-hand side of this, what you're seeing is, and I mentioned this when I talked about the OAM earlier, is there's only like these two tables right here. And what's, like I said, what's beautiful about this tool is it will kind of just show it all to you if that's what you want, right? So we can just see, oh, look at, here are all the rows in the table. And you'll see, not exactly a big surprise, the first one is OWASP.org because that's what we asked for earlier, right? And then it just starts finding IP addresses. It starts finding new names that are related to what we're looking at. And it just keeps saving more of it as we find more of it, right? But of course, we don't want to sit here and look through this. Similar to the collection of all the data of the assets that were found, we have relationships between the assets. I went over this a little bit earlier as well, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you can see there's a timestamp in here, a record type or a relation type, and then it just says, and from what asset to what other asset. and when was this last seen? So it's another timestamp. The first one being when did we first see this? The last scene being when did we last see it? Which is nice because these things do change, and you do end up with what I think would just be called historical data, which can be very useful if you want to show changes over time or trends even. But at some point, you probably also just want to get rid of this data or prune it because it gets to be a lot. And those timestamps make it practical for you to say, well, this hasn't been seen for over 3 months, and that's our window that we decided we don't want to hang on to this any longer, so delete it. And it makes it pretty easy to do that. But that's all there is. This other table is strictly, I'll call it administrative. It really has nothing to do with the data we're collecting. And all of these functions in here are supportive for operations that we do on this, especially to support things like the dashboard I showed you a moment ago. But what I want to do with this is execute my own queries. So this was the part where I was hoping maybe it would allow me to zoom in a little bit. Not exactly. All right. Well, perhaps it's not going to be very helpful with the zooming in, but what I'd like to start with is perhaps what you would think of as like the easiest or simplest query you could possibly do on this, which is where we're just going to say, show us all the names that were found that are inside the namespace of OWASP.org. So I'll copy that, drop it in here. And so I'm going to go through this one, and as I keep doing a couple of these, I'll show you differences. I realize that that is definitely small, so hopefully you can make use of this. There's not a whole lot I can do to make that bigger. But what this says is select, and from the content, a name. So that means something for the type that we're going to be requesting, which is over here, the fully qualified domain name. So it goes back to this thing I said earlier about the OAM, which is we have a lot of different asset types, but when you go look in the table of assets, they all look exactly in the rows. They're all the same thing. They just have timestamps, they have a type, and they have content, which is JSON, which is formatted differently depending on the type. But it allows us to work with all these like they're all an asset, and then go into the specific fields of the content based on what type it is. And it's a flexible way of handling this. So this says, select all the fully qualified domain names, print out the names, but the name has to be in the OWASP.org namespace. And so if I run this, it didn't like me. Hold on a second. I think I know why it's missing one of the quotes. So I'm pretty sure that's what it appears to be. There we go. Yeah, I didn't copy the quote. So, and here we go. So actually, how do I get rid of this? Oops, there we go. So yeah, there's our query up there, and we get our 29 names, just like Grafana told us about earlier. Only now it's just kind of easy. We could take that, or your tooling could take that and just put it into a text file and send it off to another tool or something like that. It puts them all right here in front of you. So like I said, easy query and something that people typically would want to do. But let me show you how things ramp up a little bit when you want to start including not just one thing, but you want, like in this case, the name and the IP addresses associated with the name. So because it quickly starts to get more complicated, I'll call it, when you're connecting the data together in this graph-like architecture or structure that the database is in. So every time you want to take advantage of a relation in this database, it requires joining the tables together. So in this case, what we're saying is we want to be able to print out the name and the IP address. So in here, we have to join the assets and the relations together based on a way to say the name and the IP are associated with each other. All of this can be found in the documentation for the OAM, so I'm not going to talk to all these things, but it still says, notice here, where the type for the fully qualified domain names is fully qualified domain name, where the type for the IPs is IP address, and then it says, and where the relation type is in, meaning it's one of these, either a record or quad a record. Given that that's the only situation, at least that we're interested in right now, where an IP, or sorry, a name, like a DNS name, is associated with an IP address. And then we still want to say, and we don't want to see any of these that are outside the scope of OWASP.org, so we need to maintain our requirement for that. If I run this, now I get the names, but notice some of them show up more than once because they have more than one IP that they resolve to. And we end up with a lot more information to look at because a lot of these have multiple IP addresses for a single name. It kind of seems like many of them have 3 actually is what I'm seeing here. So we got 3 for this name, 3 for videos, 3 for name vert host. So many of them have 3 names, or sorry, 3 IP addresses. And so the name is showing up 3 times. But here I see for the 20th anniversary, we've got 3 IPv4 addresses, and then down here I see 3 IPv6 addresses. The point I guess I was trying to make is, notice though, in order to go from the asset table to the relations, we had to do an inner join right here. You can see it right here. And then in order to go from that relation back to the asset table, because keep in mind what we're doing here is we're saying name, which is an asset, relation, and then back to another asset. We're trying to make a connection, which serves the role, I guess I'll call it, of a node with an edge to another node in a graph. So we have to make these 2 connections between the tables in order for us to have just one edge in our data that's coming back that we're then using to print this information out. It only gets more complicated when you have even more edges you want to traverse in the graph to pull the data out. And it's just that's just the way it is. There's no getting around it. And it's why creating the tooling is definitely beneficial, because once you figure out how to create the right query, you probably don't want to be doing it again. It's good to script it or, get it somewhere where you won't have to type this up again. It's also why we're creating these dashboards and things so people can just look at it easily and get the data. But if you want to know what's happening under the hood, and you you have use cases that require you to create your own queries, this is the way you'll want to be thinking about it. We don't have to go through more of these necessarily. I do think there's some that are interesting. let's see here.
Do they,
I feel like the one that gets a lot of attention or makes people often say, oh, wow, I didn't even know, like I could figure that out from the data that's being collected is this one I'll grab right here.
I was wondering if they output it in a particular order. It goes from owasp.org to mail.owasp to the cheat sheet series. Are these just kind of the more popular domains that are popped up and IP addresses, or kind of like a first come first serve?
I mean, I don't think the database guarantees that they come back in any particular order unless you ask for them, like
Okay.
sorted for you. They could just be coming back in the order that they were discovered, potentially. But even that doesn't necessarily mean much of anything because the collection engine could have various reasons why it performed one, before another. So I wouldn't, if you want it to come back in a certain order, I would say you just have to make it come
Okay.
back in that order
Yeah.
or sort it later or something like that.
What's this tool called again? Table plus.
Oh, right, Table Plus. It's
Okay.
just a I consider it a really easy tool to use that allows you to connect to like Postgres or there's a bunch of these different databases it supports, such as MySQL, and it gives you a nice interface to execute the query, see what data is returned, and it gives you messaging down here that came from the server. It's a developer's tool, probably,
Okay.
or a lot of
And you've
developers.
connected it to your running Docker. Just want to.
It's connected to the asset DB that is running in this
Okay.
container over here, and the port has been exposed to the local host because of the way this compose was set up, where we purposefully exposed the port so that if you wanted to connect to the database directly, you can do that.
Yeah, that was in the config file. Okay, cool. Yeah, keep going.
So this one is even more complicated than the one I just did, at least I think. And it still only has 2 joins, it looks like. So maybe it's not that much more difficult. But what it does have that the other one doesn't is it has another query embedded in the first query. Let's just say for now, you probably don't want to hear me explain exactly how this works, but what it's going to do, it's going to find what are called dangling pointer records. Now, maybe a lot of people would wonder, what is that and why should I care about them? So first of all, in DNS, pointer records are records that go from an IP address to a DNS name that you're probably more familiar with, such as www.owasp.org. There could be a pointer record out there that says, oh, well, this IP address has what some people call reverse DNS lookup that points us to the www.owasp.org. But dangling pointer records are ones that have been left behind and they're not actually in use anymore. And again, I think this causes a lot of people to think, oh, well, then why does this matter? But it goes back to why people tend to use pointer records. A lot of times, people or organizations have, say, events and things where they want to maybe set up a website that's just to discuss the event, or maybe it's like to RSVP to it, or tell people when and where it's going to be and how they can be part of what's going on. And to help people find it, they put the pointer record up. But then when the event is over, they take down the site. They could even remove the name. And so now you're just left with this pointer record that it's nothing but an IP address that points to a name that used to exist. Again, this tends to cause people to quickly say, well, this doesn't sound very important or like a very large threat to our organization. Maybe not if you're looking at this only from the perspective of will this allow someone to break in or breach your organization? But if you leave these around for a long enough period of time, and what I mean by that is I've seen organizations that have left these for years, and they have hundreds of these remaining. And with all these names, hold on just a second. So with all these names discoverable, but they're not actually being used anymore, an attacker could get a really good understanding of what has your company been doing publicly for the last 3 or 5 years, right? It's an OPSEC nightmare is what it is. That could give them a lot of ideas about who their partners are, who who they're doing business with, who their suppliers are, and it could help them dig up information that is still current and important to your organization. And maybe you thought they couldn't discover. Maybe you feel like you'd been doing a good job of keeping this to yourself, uh, but didn't realize that these records were revealing so much about your business. So maybe going through this really quick, what this is saying is we're going to print the name of the pointer record itself, and we're going to print the name of the name it points to. And then we're going to say, we're going to make the connection between those things using the asset table and the relations table, like I mentioned earlier. So this is fairly, like, say, straightforward once you've done this quite a few times. We're going to make sure that both types are fully qualified domain names, but we are only interested in pointer records. So we're not going to say any of these various types of records. It's just pointer records. And we do want to make sure that the name that's being pointed to is within OWASP.org, because that's what we're looking at here. And then the magic here is it says, and where the fully qualified domain name ID is not in the results that come back from this lookup here. What that means is the name doesn't exist anywhere in our data. That's how we know it's dangling. So we say it's not in here, and where and this is just where the type for this has to be one of these. So anyway, it goes back to what I said. The whole idea is we're going to find these, we're going to make sure they're in scope, and then we're going to make sure they do not point to something legitimate, because we're not interested in, say, the good pointer records. Those are in use and they're being managed correctly. We're only interested in these ones that are dangling or lost, or people have lost track of them perhaps and allow them to continue to exist. All right, so let's fire that off. And looks like it's mad at me about something. Oh, well, no, it's not mad at me. The problem with this demonstration for this target is OWASP is really good about this, which I guess I would say I would expect no less of them. But if I did this against I'll just say, some of the universities that I monitor for testing purposes, they could have so many of these, and some of them, I'll just say the results can be almost like spooky, how much it's revealing about their, what I would say is probably private business that they didn't expect anyone was going to just be able to dig up whenever they wanted. But yeah, OWASP is really good at this, so it makes my demonstration a little difficult. But if I had more data that I could comfortably show you right now from some of these other organizations, that would reveal these dangling pointer records. Now, the reason people seem to like this is, first of all, a lot of people don't even know that this happens, right? They don't understand these aspects of OPSEC that come into play with your internet infrastructure. And they don't tend to realize how easy it is to look this stuff up once you have the data sitting in this very organized format or layout like the OAM. And this is just one example, right, of based on or leveraging the data that we're currently collecting. But imagine when there's other types of data that we're collecting, which this is on the verge of happening right now, like emails and phone numbers, and you can start to make the connection or association between those data items and these other ones as well, right? And where when it makes sense that the association would either be concerning or also reveal potential. It's not always vulnerabilities, right? It could just be enough for you to start a social engineering campaign, or just enough to get your foot in the door and make your activities seem legitimate or believable. And it's game over potentially, right? Everybody knows this already from how well we've seen this work for years. But this can make it easier for you when all this is being collected automatically, or it's an automated fashion for you. And then it just is for the pickings, right? It's just sitting here waiting for you to ask the right questions, and it'll drop it right in front of you. So that's what, and when I've done this for other organizations where they've said, go ahead and do this against our namespace, and then I run this and they find all these names that they didn't think were just sitting there. That's usually when, the jaws drop and things like that. But there's a lot of different questions you can potentially ask from what's collected by this, what Amass is doing today. Like, for instance, a lot of people would like to know what organizations are managing the net blocks that their assets are in. Some companies don't really have a great way of doing this, or they wouldn't know where to start looking. Again, with the OAM, this is just a query away once you've done the enumeration. Some easier things that I would hope people know how to get information about is like the name servers that are being used by not just your organization, but all the providers that you're also using, such as cloud providers and things like that. They're probably all using different name servers, and it'd be good to know which assets are, located in which servers, so to speak. These are easy things to look up when you have all the data in one place, like the OAM, and now it's just one question with the entire answer. Some people again like to know, well, don't just show me the IP addresses that the names have, but what address range are they sitting in? You can easily do that with the data in the OAM. So yeah, another one people tend to like is show me what DNS zones the names are in. Because, for instance, I don't think we're going to see this with OWASP, but again, pick a larger organization that's been around for a very long time and has a lot of culture. You'll often see that they have their org broken up into many zones, oftentimes based on things like departments within the organization and things like that. If you are able to print out all the zones, you can almost create like an org chart for these target organizations, and you haven't even spoken to anyone that works there. But these are things that you could say get leaked out through the way they've decided to configure their IT, essentially. I could show that real quick. Again, I don't know how interesting this is going to be for OWASP, but let's see what happens. So as you can see, this is a much easier thing to query for. Now, in case you're not familiar with what a DNS zone is, think of it as a section of the configuration. It's a portion of the config, and you can pretty much say everything from this point in the namespace and beyond in that direction falls within a certain zone. Different zones can have different configurations. They can even have different servers and things like that. So it's definitely good to know what the zones are. If you're an attacker, I would say you want to know how the namespace changes across, you might think of it as the battlefield. But it also can just be informative, as I was saying earlier, to get an idea of how the organization chose to set it up, because it could be driven by internal, again, I'll call it culture or structure within the organization. So let's give this a shot. Yeah, as I suspected, OWASP is a very simple organization, and it only has one zone, which is at the root of the namespace. So there's not a lot to see. But like I said, if you go to a larger org, they could have, depending on how they want it set up, they could potentially have 10 different zones based on, well, for instance, let me give you a real typical situation. If you go to a university and they have a CS department or a computer science department, many CS departments have always had the attitude, well, we'll manage our own zone. We have our own way we want to do things. It's not similar to the, how IT wants to do it. So it's very common that, you would see CS having a separate zone configuration. But there could easily be a different zone for every school within the university. That could just be the way they preferred to do it, or that politically worked easier for them. And it's interesting to know what those schools are, or how they have it broken out, or how they view it from the inside. All right, so that's a taste, at least, of how you could directly request the data from the database if you don't want to, say, use our tooling that we provide or the web interface that we're working on. I think eventually, as we make some of these things easier and easier to use, it'll be probably tempting to just use the web interface. But I'm always interested in hearing how people have decided to access the data directly and solve their needs or use cases differently by essentially using the data in ways that we haven't thought of before. And I encourage it. I mean, the OAM was created so that we could stop assuming how people want to use this and put the control in the hands of information security professionals, that they know what they want, they know what they need, and they just want to be able to have the data in a standard format and have it easy to use and at their disposal. And so that was at least I'll call it the simple version of the demonstration. Probably, assuming you find this interesting, or you're thinking, oh, this is great, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. I'd love to know more about how to configure it for different purposes, or get the right data sources to meet our needs. We are going to be covering those things in lengthier presentations, such as the workshops that we do at DEF CON. But also join our Discord, and we're always talking about, people have questions about this all the time, and we answer the questions right there in the Discord server. We're willing to share example queries and things like that. So I would say you're certainly not alone. There's quite a community around this project, and it's easy to get answers to your questions. What I kind of had for, say, a conclusion on all of this is kind of coming back to the beginning, or what I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, the purpose of all this is to improve your situational awareness, right? It's to be able to say, we know what is out there and we're comfortable with that, right? Or we have a pretty good feeling of what level of risk is attached to us having that level of exposure on the internet. As long as you can use this and what comes back makes you feel like, yep, that's exactly what we wanted, well, then I would say you can feel a little bit better and enjoy your day. If it raises eyebrows or makes you a little concerned because you weren't sure that those were supposed to be publicly accessible, or you don't even know how someone got approval to get that out there, or it's too early to be deployed, well, then this would be great data to have to then escalate these issues and make sure that these things are being taken care of quickly before they become a problem. And I have yet to see a single company. I haven't worked with a single company in my time so far that ran this and didn't have something pop up that made them say, I don't think that's supposed to be there, and feel the need to do something about it. No one seems to have perfect cyber hygiene. It's a very dynamic space where hardworking people are changing what this looks like constantly, and we need someone watching to make sure that, you know, no policies are being violated, all the procedures are being followed, and this is just part of the how it needs to be done. We need auditing to make sure this is being done correctly. The open asset model and the asset DB, we worked pretty hard in the last year or so to build these components so that instead of the Amass project assuming what you need from this, we're trying to put the data in your hands. We're trying to collect it and make it completely available to you using these well understood database servers. Of course, we're building, I'll call it tooling around it for popular use cases and the ways people have let us know they want to leverage the Amass system. But we're trying to make the data easy to use and available to everybody. And that also includes to collect data in other ways that Amass isn't right now, and bring the data to your OAM database to just create the most complete picture you possibly can and get maximum visibility on your organization. All of these discoveries, they create links, right? They link together. And the more of the data that you have in the OAM and with the relationships identified, the more complicated your questions can be about your organization's presence or exposure on the internet. That's why it's definitely beneficial to bring this all together into one place and to understand how these assets are linked together. That's what this project is really quite focused on doing these days, is making sure that we're accurately representing these assets and all the opportunities for these relationships or links between them.
So I think for the Zoom users and the people here in the room, like if you want to be able to, again, go to the Slack channel for OWASP, join the OWASP Atlanta chapter. Okay, we can continue this conversation, right? Because Jeff is on the Slack for OWASP. We can definitely, make sure that he's, selected to the channel. So if you have questions like, okay, what does this data mean? There were some good questions on, do I integrate with my SIM? And I agree with Jeff's answer there that, you predominantly wouldn't want to do that. Just because it doesn't really provide a lot of value from the detective standpoint. This is more valuable for like asset management. What am I running so that I can attack it or defend it, right?
Yeah, well, the real reason a lot of companies need this is that this data you're seeing here, this list of assets that are exposed on the internet, many of them don't realize all those are reachable.
Right.
Right? They're out there because someone decided to put it there, but the people making the decisions about, are we comfortable with that? Does that match our policies and the way we want it to run our company and the way we want to be viewed on the internet? Or the way we want people to see how we handle best practices by, at this company? A lot of times it doesn't match, right? The way they actually look and the way they were hoping to look, two different things. And there's different reasons. Well, why would that matter? Is it just reputational? Well, yes, but not just reputational. It's also what you're allowing a potential attacker to see for not just potential targets, but you're allowing them to learn about your organization and how you operate and who you depend on, who your third-party providers are and things like that. This is all information that you shouldn't be giving it away. It's too valuable to just give it away to other organizations.
This is open source, so if you can use it to defend your company, someone else could potentially do the opposite.
Oh, yeah. Well, red teamers use this all the time. Because it makes their life a little bit easier. I would argue they already knew how to do this.
Yeah.
They didn't need this to make it possible, but this certainly makes their life a little bit easier. We really need the blue side doing it so that they can say, we know what they know. And now we look at that and say, are we comfortable with that? If the answer is no, well, then you have tasking for Monday. Well, and that's really what it is. That's what it comes down to.
So Jeff, I'm sure you get this question a lot. Some people might ask you, why this versus, using like Shodan or Census or something like that.
Well, first of all, Shodan and Census can be integrated with us. So if you just really like Shodan or you feel their data is very valuable, well then put the credential, the API credentials in here and we can pull it in. But you also don't necessarily need Shodan in order to come up with this data.
Yeah.
Like for instance, this was created without Shodan. But we have other data sources that we're using, such as Whois XML API and some other very good ones. That I would argue provide even more data than each of these data sources. We could come up with a day's worth of talking about when to use which ones and which ones bring value in certain situations. And it's not as simple as, oh, just go get Shodan, because that might not be the answer, right? But Amass kind of tries to make this easy by saying, well, if you have it and you like it, pull it in.
Yeah. Jeff Foley, everybody, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll turn off the Zoom.
I have a quick question. Are you aware of any potential for it to increase with the requests in the atmosphere?
Hosting this within AWS?
Yeah, and if you're going after your domains, so
Well, wherever you deploy this, you'll have to be prepared for it generates traffic.
Yes.
No doubt about it. But you don't need to necessarily run this within AWS or run this on-prem, and that would be fine.
I'll add to that, if it's publicly facing AWS, domains that you would.
oh yeah, that's what I think I'm trying to say. If it's-
So if they're public and you're going to be charged when someone hits it, they're just going to show you that it's public and you're getting charged when people hit this.
Yeah.
So that's valuable
'Cause
information.
I think they're if you're using the Route 53, it charges for certain records of DNS queries, but
Right.
I don't know.
And that's just unavoidable if you have a public access point, if you have a public point, they can see it, they can query even some of the private ones.
I think
And
the A records are.
all this is going to do is show you that it's out there and that that's something that you have to control for. Or a risk you have to accept.
Yeah, I just want to make sure before
I'm
I
an
do
AWS
it, and
solution,
then
don't
my
think
boss
it's
is
an
I mean, no one has come back to us and said that by using this, it created any unexpected costs, right? Like I said, it will generate traffic. It does run the containers, which you'd have to pay for that. But actually like I said earlier, people use this with thousands of customers, that all have hundreds or thousands of namespaces that they're watching, and they seem to do pretty good with managing costs with this, so. But we're always open to suggestions if you have ideas on how we could make it more cost effective for people to use.
Jeff, do you see people using this internally?
No, because it's not designed for that.
So it's just designed to see public sources.
It's for external. Now, not to say that it couldn't. Well, go down that road eventually, but internal asset management is a very different animal.
That's a whole beast.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like it's a little bit more well handled. And there's some really good products out there to help you with it if you're having trouble with it. So I don't know if I feel like we need to go down that road. But external attack surface management, intelligence, whatever, is a poorly handled arena that desperately needs the help, I think. And even if that help eventually one day becomes our guidance and best practices on how to do it right, and how to say, if I'm gonna go get a vendor to do this for me, how do I know if they're bringing me the value I need? I'd be happy. If that's OWASP's contribution, that's fine with me. I've told people that this one day could just be a recipe book for how do you set up something like this, or how should you expect your vendor to be doing this for you? And that would be fine with me. This doesn't necessarily need to be the one and only tool for this downstream. My intentions with this right from the beginning were always, I just want to see this problem start going away. I want to see blue teams have the advantage again, like I was talking about earlier, and then I'll be happy, right? Because it's silly that they don't. That's the reality of the situation.
Well, Jeff, thanks again for coming out.
If you find that interesting, forget, say, the discovery process or the data collection. If you just like the data modeling of all this, I would say, please come see us on the link, the Discord. We'd love to speak with you and see how you could become a contributor to what we're doing. This is definitely not a closed project, as I think I spent quite a bit of time talking about when I was in Atlanta. This is a welcoming and open project that is happy to work with. I was about to say OWASP members, but really anybody in the information security community that feels that they can help and bring this to as many people as we can. That's why I felt this project belonged at OWASP, is so that we could raise awareness around this and get it in the hands of as many people as possible and for free. Right. So we're making this as easy as possible and economic as possible for everybody. So I think with that, I'll close there and say thank you for your time watching all this and listening. And please follow up if you'd like. Either you have a few options, right? You could go to the OWASP Slack. You could go to our project page. You could go to our GitHub organization, or you can come to our Discord. They're all great places to come, or even Twitter. Like find us in all these places, and feel free to throw your questions in our direction or ideas and anything.
I can put the links for all of that in the description for the video on YouTube.
Yes, thank you so much.